I'm not sure if anybody else is out there, but if there is, I am now online and talking with you. I shall send a chat saying hello. We'll start as usual, just after about 1 o'clock, 1 o'clock UK time, and I see that there are 5 people signed in, which I think is about the right number. So I'll just wait until 1 o'clock, and I just remind you that the chat feature is there to be used. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, I think most people are now signed in. There is a short time delay from what I say to you hearing me, so I have to remind myself to take that into account. But hopefully, I think most people are now signed in, so we'll just wait a moment or so and then we'll get going. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 people signed in and myself, so that's good. Okay, great. I am delivering this seminar today from Cambridge, where the sun is shining, which is very nice. So I hope the weather is good where you are today. And I hope that everybody received the copy of the text of today's webinar as well, which I sent this morning. If you haven't received that for some reason, then let me know and I'll send that. I won't be able to send it now, but I'll make sure I send it after. If for some reason you didn't receive the text of today's webinar, then let me know and I will send that at the end of today when I am back in the office. Right, it's now 1 o'clock. Okay, so it's now 1 o'clock, so I think I will start. If you are having any problems, then please, the best way to communicate is by sending a chat message. Now, when I start showing the slides, that means that I too will be watching the slide screen. And when I watch the slide screen, it means I can't see all the chats. But I will make sure that I go back and check the chats every 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 slides to see if there are any questions that people are asking. So if you have questions, please ask your question by submitting it as a chat question and I will then answer it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the slide presentation so you will see that. So hopefully you will now see a slide presentation rather than me. And I will start with the first few slides and I will just go back and check to make sure that everybody is able to see the slides. So what this webinar is about is helping people understand and complete the application forms for the Culture Program. I think most people either have been to one of my webinars before or have awareness, but I'm just going to start with some general bit of background about Creative Europe. That's a slide just illustrating the successes of the UK compared to the European Union, indicating that we have quite a good success rate in that particular period, which is one reason why we want to encourage more people to apply, to try and increase the number of actual projects that are successful by increasing the number of applications. I'm just going to stop this for 1 second. I'm really sorry about this, but I just need to double check because I have a suspicion that I have accidentally opened a slightly earlier version of the slideshow. I'm really sorry about this, but I just need to double check that I've got the right version open here. Okay, we're back again. I'm really sorry, I had opened a slightly earlier version, so we are now on the right version, and we have a slightly more comprehensive slide of successes, which also updates to 2013. Just to make the very brief point, I'm not going to labour this point, but just to say that although we had a high success rate in the UK of 35.6%, for example, more than twice the Italian success rate of 7.7%, the Italians were putting in far more applications than the UK, so we weren't getting as many successful projects. So our aim is to try and encourage applications from, not just from the UK, from any number of countries, to try and make sure that people take advantage of extra information to help them complete the application. So Creative Europe, as I think everybody knows, is the umbrella name for the existing culture program and the media program and this new financial facility that will come on board. So there's 455 million euros you will see for the culture program over the next 7-year period. And as it says at the bottom there, the priorities for the new culture program are much more closely associated with the general objectives of the European Union, particularly those which are stated in the Europe 2020 mission statement. Europe 2020 mission statement, in a sense, is the guiding document for the European Union's aims and objectives in the next 7 years. And all programs are asked to relate to Europe 2020. And as far as the culture program is concerned, this means looking at culture projects which might address criteria such as job creation potential of the sectors, capacity building, digital agenda, innovation, and so on. And we'll look at that when we look at the individual criteria. Just making the point that in terms of the cultural and creative sectors, we now have very broadly based definitions. Activities based on cultural values and artistic and creative expressions, whether these are market or non-market oriented. In other words, you can have profit-making organizations as partners within the culture program these days. So, you know, the projects can't make a profit, but if you had a commercial organization as a partner, that's absolutely acceptable. Whatever the type of structure that carries them out, irrespective of how it is financed, different stages on the value chain, organizations might be involved in not all of, but some of the development, creation, production, dissemination, preservation, different aspects of culture, all are welcome within the program. And that gives some examples of the different cultural sectors. And finally, just makes the point that if you're applying to the culture program, your project cannot only be about audiovisual. There may be an audiovisual element to the project, but the project must cover a wider range of cultural areas than just audiovisual. Okay, culture program, we're going to look at that. Now, just before we do look at that, I'm just going to double check to make sure that nobody has added any questions. No, they don't. That's great. So we will go back to the presentation, and I will keep going. So the culture program. The objectives of the culture program: to support the capacity of the sectors to operate transnationally and internationally, promoting the circulation of works and the mobility of players. This particular set of objectives are the standard objectives that have been there for almost as long as the culture program has been in existence. So the circulation of works and the mobility of cultural players are particularly important points. The second objective is all about audience development, reaching new and enlarged audiences, improving access to cultural and creative works, particular focus on children, young people, people with disabilities and underrepresented groups, engaging people in new and innovative ways, retaining and enlarging audiences, improving the experience, deepening the relationship. All of those are crucial within the broad objective for audience development. And finally, innovation and creativity. Artistic innovation, not surprisingly, it's the culture program. Testing of new business models might be important. Use of digital technologies. Promotion of innovative spillovers on other sectors. Now, this sometimes can come across as a bit confusing to people. What do they mean by innovative spillovers in other sectors? What you should see this as is an opportunity for you to demonstrate that your culture project has wider-ranging objectives, particularly ones that might be relevant to the objectives stated in the Europe 2020 mission statement. So, for example, if your project is working, if it's a theatre project working in disadvantaged housing estates with unemployed young people, your project might be providing those young people with new skills, a greater capacity to be more confident, to present themselves in job interviews. And as a result of all that, those people might, have a better chance of getting a job, or at least getting some way onto the job ladder, in which case the project is addressing the aspect of the Europe 2020 mission statement, which is about making sure that people, in some way, it will be addressing the challenge of unemployment across Europe. So, in terms of the strands of the culture program, what we really have these days is a focus on projects, big projects and small projects. There are opportunities to support literary translation, and there are opportunities to support platforms, but we're focusing today on the project strand, which, as you will see, is where 70% of the budget is going these days. In terms of projects, the small projects are projects with a minimum of 3 partners, the leader plus 2 co-organisers, 2 or more co-organisers from 3 different countries. And you can get up to €200,000 for those projects, being a maximum of 60% of the eligible budget. There is always a match funding, and I'll explain match funding a bit later on. Large projects, it's the project leader plus 5 or more co-organisers from a total of 6 different countries, requesting no more than €2 million, which is very good. The Commission will provide €2 million for your project, but that's on a 50-50 basis, so you and your partners would have to provide a maximum of a further €2 million, which I recognise is quite a challenge for most organisations working in the cultural sector. Whether you're doing a small project or a large project, the maximum length of time your project can run is 4 years, 48 months. Okay? And there is an opportunity to add what are called associate partners, and I'll explain a little bit more about them in due course as well. Okay, now before we look in detail at the project partners, I'm just going to check again to make sure that there are no additional, and there aren't, so that's fine. Let's go back to the presentation. Great. Okay, so in terms of where partners can come from, partners can come from the 28 member states, any of the 28 member states, and other countries who may have signed an agreement to participate in this program. Now, the countries who have signed agreements is an evolving list. Countries that have signed at this point in time are Norway and Iceland, Albania, Bosnia, Macedonia, Montenegro, and Serbia, and also Georgia and Moldova, which are part of the neighbourhood countries in Europe. All those countries can participate as full partners in the new program. So, just to be clear about this, the difference between eligible countries and the non-eligible third countries, in other words, countries outside the list of eligible countries, your lead organiser and your co-organisers must come from the list of eligible countries, bearing in mind, of course, that once you have your minimum number of lead organiser and co-organisers from different countries, you can add extra co-organisers who can come from different or the same country. So if your 3 main co-organisers, your lead partner and 2 others, if that was the UK, France and Slovakia, then you could then have an extra co-organiser which could come from a completely different country like Spain, or it could come from one of the existing countries, the UK or France or Slovakia. So once you have your minimum from the number of different countries, you can then add additional co-organisers from the same country or from different countries. And you can also add associate partners from anywhere, not just from the eligible countries, but from the non-eligible third countries, in other words, from anywhere in the world. So if you wanted to add your associate partner from another country such as United States or Uruguay, you would be able to do that, and that would not be a problem. And you can now spend up to 30% of the project budget on the non-eligible third countries. This slide here is simply to give you information as to the technical terms for the lead organizer and the co-organizer and what their roles are and the associate partner. So I'm not going to go through that in detail. That's simply sort of as a reference statement. Number of partners, we always advise that you should go for one more than minimum number of partners. They will usually prioritize projects with a larger number of partners if there is a tie in the jury scores. And also, if something goes wrong with one of your partners, as an insurance policy, it's best to have an extra partner so you can continue to be a legal project with the minimum number of partners. So if the minimum is 3, then try and go for 4. Where should your partners come from? There is now a criteria that your partners should be beyond your direct geographical neighbours. So you need to address that in the development of your partnership. So try and spread your partnership around, the different parts of Europe, Northern Europe, Eastern European countries, the Balkan countries, Mediterranean countries, and so on. Partners can be any type of organisation. The key criteria is they have to be legally recognised in their own country, but they could be, officially sort of substantial organisations like universities or local authorities. They can be small scale. They can be profit-making, not-for-profit. It's very, very open. The only other thing is that organisations have to demonstrate that they've been in existence for at least 2 years on the date of the deadline for the application. And before the application form can be completed, partners must register and get a participant identification code, a PIC code. This registration is extremely simple. You're essentially just putting in your basic details of your organisation, its address details, contact information, type of organisation, and so on. And that you will then generate a PIC code, and the lead organisation, when filling in the application form, can only start their application form once they have the PIC codes of the minimum number of partners. Partnerships should reflect the commitment of the project to being European, bring new and different strengths to the project. They don't particularly want a project just to be a collection of Baroque orchestras or whatever it might be. They're looking for some variety amongst the partners. Clear in the structure and role, and as we will see, the application form now requires you to produce a schedule where you and your partners can agree the different stages of the project and which partner is responsible for which stage and so on. Partners should have a roughly equivalent role, so the project is seen to be balanced. I mean, obviously the lead partner will do a little more. Collective ownership, partners should be seen to be all putting something into the project and getting something out and working towards achieving the overall aims and objectives. There's a list there that I'm not going to go through at this point about some suggestions about finding partners. If people have particular questions about finding partners, then you can send me an email after the webinar is over, and I can respond to that individually. I think that's the easiest way. Okay, I'm just going to again check once more to make sure that there are no questions coming in at this particular stage. Here we are. There are a couple of questions. I will address that question now. The question is, can Bosnia and Herzegovina be a project leader? And the answer is yes. Bosnia and Herzegovina are an official partner, eligible country, and have signed the partnership agreement, so they can be a lead applicant organisation for the culture programme at the moment. So there's no question about that. Right, I will go back to the presentation, but as I said earlier, please, if you have additional questions, please do send them in, and I will go back to the questions every so often as we go through. Okay, so we're going to focus on submitting the application. So what we're looking at is the next deadline. There is an annual deadline for the project strand of the culture programme, and that's the first Wednesday in October, and the next one is the 1st of October. The first Wednesday this year is the 1st of October. You will be informed by the following March, so applying in October 2014, you will be informed by March 2015. You have to choose a start date between May to December of the following year. So for the deadline this year, 2014, your start date would be between May to December 2015, and then you add 1 to 4 years to get your end date, which would be the official end date of the project. Do make sure that you remember that the start and end dates are particularly important for financial reasons. You can't incur expenditure outside the start and end dates of the project. So your end date should be a couple of months after your final activity to give you a chance to do all the financial reconciliation and reporting after the project is over. In the UK, the Creative Europe Desk for the Culture Programme is listed there. In other countries, you can get the details of your Creative Europe Desk by going to the Commission's website. If anybody's not sure where to get that from, please send me an email and I can show you where you can get the details of the contact point in your particular country. And just making the point that Euclid obviously offers some additional services to help people with their applications if you feel you need additional help. Obviously, we are an independent organisation, so there is a small charge for that, but we do offer that service. Applications must be made through an online application system. You can put your application in any one of the official EU languages. We recommend that you use one of the big 4 languages, English, French, German, big 5 languages, Italian or Spanish. There's a website there as to where you can download the online application forms. You have to submit it before 12 noon on the date of the deadline, which of course is 11 AM UK time and may be different in other countries in Europe depending on the time zone. You then have to print out your application form and then post it with a USB stick or a disk with the various attachments, and I'll explain what those attachments are as we go through. Do make sure that you press the button to submit your application form at least the day before the deadline. You don't want to be submitting it on the day of the deadline and then possibly have any computer problems which mean there are delays in submitting your application. Do make sure you press the button at least the day before. Just a small caveat about applying more than once. If you're applying as a project leader in one particular year or one particular deadline, you can only apply as either a project leader for a small project or a large project. You can't be a project leader for both. You could be a co-organizer in another application, or as many applications as you want. If you are a project leader of a successful large-scale project, then you can't apply again as a project leader in any other application until your large project is finished. But you could apply as a co-organizer, and this only applies to project leaders of large organizations. The selection process is just summarized on this particular slide, and the reason we put that in is just to highlight the fact that sometimes if you're applying for a grant, you may choose to sort of apply for much less than the maximum, as this you might feel that's going to help your chances of success if you're not seen to be too greedy and you're applying for a bit less. This doesn't really apply for the culture program. If your budget can justify applying for the maximum amount available from the European Union, there is absolutely nothing wrong with making an application for the maximum amount available. Okay. Mandates and agreements. One of the things you have to include in your application form is that each co-organizer has to provide a mandate letter, and you also have to provide a cooperation agreement. Cooperation agreement is pretty much what you put in your application form. It shouldn't say anything more than what's in your application form, nor should it say anything less. It's simply summarizing what's in the application form and making it clear that this is a signed legal agreement between the various partners as to what you're going to do, what's going to happen at different times and stages during the project, and which partner is delivering what by whatever date is seen as being appropriate. Okay, I'm just going to once again, bear with me, I'm just going to check again to see whether there are any additional questions. No more additional questions at this stage. So we'll go back to the slides. Right, income. Just make a few general points about the income. You can only really apply once for a particular project if you're, if you apply to different programs for the same project, and if you are successful in more than one, you would have to reject the other successful offers of funding, because you can only get one European Commission award for any particular project. That's all that particular slide is summarising there. In terms of the income of your project, the Commission will put in their share, 200,000 up to 60% of the budget for small projects, $500,000 per year for up to 4 years, so €2 million for large projects up to 50%. And the other 40 or 50% of the budget in terms of income is known as the match funding. One part of match funding can be income generated by the project. So if you're putting on performances or you're charging people to attend your exhibition, then the income from your ticket sales can be part of the match funding. It may be not just ticket sales, but sales of workshop places or registrations to seminars or symposium. And it may also be other things like merchandising. If you are, selling T-shirts or CDs and DVDs of your events or whatever, all of that can be included as part of the match funding. The rest of the match funding has to be generated by the project co-organisers, and this can include, it could include own resources. I have to say that the match funding from the different project co-organisers does not have to be equal. If one of your partners is from Norway and one is from Albania, then their capacity to generate match funding may be significantly different. So there may be different levels of match funding generated by different co-organisers. If you have a Norwegian partner or someone from a wealthy European country, they may have a bit of money in their bank account that they're happy to put into the project. So money may come from the own resources of one or more partners. Otherwise, it may be a matter of generating income by applying for grants or seeking sponsorship from commercial companies or donations from individuals. You can have some seconded staff. In other words, if you have a member of staff who is going to be seconded to work on the project, in other words, they're going to spend half their normal time working on the project, then half their salary, in other words, the equivalent amount of their salary, can go into the project budget as both income and expenditure. If you are doing that, then it must be the real salaries of the particular staff members, and you have to do some administrative extra work, which is a revised job description, making it clear for this particular period they're working on the project, and they will need to keep timesheets of their work on the project, and the salary records will have to be annotated so it's clear there is a split between their normal job and their work on the project. That is not a problem. You cannot have contributions in kind for the culture program. What we mean by in kind is that if you had a friendly printing company that gave you some posters for your show, you couldn't invent an amount of money and say, well, those posters are worth €5,000, we'll put €5,000 in the budget. There has to be real money. If your printing company produced some posters and sent you an invoice for €5,000 and you paid the invoice, and then maybe at a later date the printing company chose to make a donation to the project, so money went out of the project to pay for the posters and money came back into the project as a donation, that is possible in a limited manner, but because real money is flowing in and out of the project. But that's essential. Overheads. You can include up to 7% of the project budget as overheads without any evidence as to what that means. In other words, overheads covers things like rent and electricity and maybe photocopying and things like that, and you can put up to 7% in for the various overhead costs of the partners. You don't have to provide a breakdown of that either in your application or in your final report, but if your project was audited, and they too tend to sort of audit 1 in 10 projects these days, if your project was audited by the European Commission, you would have to be able to show that this 7% had some basis in reality. So you'd have to be able to dig out your invoices from your electricity company or your photocopier company to demonstrate that this was based on real figures. You are allowed to subcontract within the project. You know, you may well want to spend money if you're running an outdoor festival. You may want to you may need to subcontract to other companies to bring in outdoor staging or lighting or portable toilets or whatever it might be. Subcontracting is absolutely fine. There are rules you'll need to follow about procurement if it's large amounts of money going on to subcontracting, but there's nothing wrong with the principle of subcontracting. Payment procedures, just to be clear, that you do get money in this program. You get money up front. The top two boxes, if your project is up to 750,000 euros, then the Commission will give you 70% of your grant up front if your project is running for less than 2 years. If your project is running for more than 2 years, they'll give you 50% up front at the very beginning of the project, and then another 30% when you've spent 70% of the first 50%. So when you spend most of the first grant, they'll give you another 30% if your project goes for more than 2 years. The final payment, obviously the final 30% or 20% if it's a longer project, that will always come a bit late because it does depend on you submitting your final financial statements and reports and all those being agreed. So the final payments come late, but you do get 70% or 50% of the money up front for your project. Okay, once again, I'm just going to double check to make sure that there have been no further questions, and no, they haven't. I hope that means you're all still there, and nobody's sort of dropped off, and you can all still hear me. If you know, do feel free just to reassure me. If you want to just say hello on the chat box, that's always fine. I'm always happy to make sure that people are still participating in the webinar. Okay, so we're going to go on creating a project. The idea, the partnership, and the forms. Now, obviously today we're going to focus on looking at the application forms, but at the end of the day, the idea is the most important thing. They're looking for innovative, exciting, unusual ideas and a good, strong partnership. If you have an innovative idea that you've developed with your partners and you have a strong partnership, then you know, you have a very good chance of success. The application forms will be, in my view, less of a challenge if you've addressed the idea in the partnership. If you are a Connexus member, then you can download our Am I Ready template. That's a template simply that helps people decide how ready they are in terms of what is required for organizations and partners. It's a simple, you know, you insert a score in a number of different criteria, and that will be able to help you decide how ready you are to make an application. The guidance note you will see provides a number of examples of projects. You can read this at your leisure. I'm not going to go through this word by word. There are some examples here for performing arts organizations that might get together to produce events. There are examples about exchanges, which might be with a view to capacity building, helping people acquire skills and know-how. Exchanges to help people with their creative practice involving stays and residencies. The final example is about exchanges of artifacts. So if you're working in the museums and heritage sector, there might be ways in which you might sort of, you know, work to exchange artifacts and objects within your museums or heritage organizations. But at the end of the day, do remember that it's not how much you do, it's how interesting and innovative. You don't want to pile too much activity into your project. A simple idea that is innovative is much more welcome to the European Commission. This example here, weather stations, I think is a good example of a very simple idea that was, you know, really innovative and different. Weather stations essentially is putting writers in residence from one country into a weather station in another country and then inviting them to reflect on the impact of climate change in Europe in the 21st century and to write about this. And you know, there are other aspects of the project, like, you know, activities with schools and so on, but essentially it's a bright idea, innovative, unusual, but quite simple. So that's the sort of project that they are after. Okay, once again, I'm just going to double check to make sure there are no more questions. I'm sorry about this, but I do want to make sure we're not missing anything. Yes, we're fine, we're not missing anything as far as I can tell. So we will keep going. Application process. Don't forget there are 2 submissions. There is the e-form, which you have to fill in, and then there's the application package altogether. For the e-form, you need Adobe Reader 9 or higher. Make sure you read the guide for applicants, read the submission user guide. Don't forget the key attachments, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then you must submit it online. The application package is a printed copy of the form with the attachments and annexes on the disk or the memory stick, and that all has to be posted to go to Brussels on the 1st of October. It doesn't have to arrive in Brussels by the 1st of October, it just has to be posted before 4 p.m. on the 1st of October. The structure of the forms, there are 3 parts to the form, 3 main parts. There is the Adobe form, which is essentially 2 sections about the applicant and about the project. So there are sections A and B of the application form, which each applicant has to complete. We'll look at those in a moment. And then there is about the project, which is completed obviously once for each project. So sections A and B will be repeated as many times as there are partners, and sections C, D, E, F, and G will just be once for the whole project. There are 1 or 2 exceptions to that, which I'll point out as we go through, but essentially that's the breakdown. Then the second document is the Word document, which is the project description, and the third document is the Excel spreadsheet, which is the budget. And then as well as that, there are all the various attachments and annexes, which we'll look at as well. So the Adobe form, the Word document, and the Excel spreadsheet, plus the attachments and annexes. So the main form. You do not start your form, your Adobe form, until you have the PIC codes of all your co-organizers, or at least the minimum number. You cannot start your form until you have at least the minimum number, including the lead partner, because it won't allow you to start the proper form until you have at least 3 PIC codes of 3 co-organizers. And after you've submitted your co-organizers, you have to select who is going to be the lead partner, and you can't change that. So you need to have those before you start the form. So the co-organizer will have registered and got their PIC codes. You download and open the form, test the connection, complete the cover page and insert the list of the co-organizers, and then you save the form, and as a result of saving the form at this point, you thus create your proper application form. And you then go ahead and complete the form, and eventually, just before the deadline, you will validate and submit the application. Okay. Right, so going through the application form, the cover section, you select the program, sub-program, action, sub-action. These are all drop-down menus. It will be perfectly clear that you're going for culture program, and it will be probably small projects or maybe larger projects. You can give a project title and a project acronym. Commission does tend to like acronyms, so you may want to consider an acronym. And you then indicate which language the application is being submitted in from a list of the available languages. The next page, you insert the partners. Now what you do here is you simply insert the PIC code, and then you select add to list. So you will then build up simply by inserting the PIC codes. And once you insert the PIC codes, the application form will automatically add the details for that PIC code. So you don't need to put in any more details other than the PIC code. You then select which organization will be the applicant, and then you create the form. Any associate partners, you add those at the end of section D. You do not add associate partners at this particular stage here. Okay? Right, so save and create. Click on the Create Application Form button. Save the file to your computer. Cannot change the applicant organization, as I said. Then you get on with completing the rest of it. Part A, which is about the applicant organizations, a lot of this information, as I said, is automatically imported from what the individual co-organizers have submitted when they registered for their PIC code. For the lead partner, section A2 is the contact person, and A3 is the legal representative who has the capacity to sign the application form on behalf of the organization. For the other partners, the section A2 person is the legal representative. So just be clear about that. Okay, I'm just worried to make sure that we don't miss any questions, so I'm just going to go back again and check if there are any questions. Christina said hello. Hello, Christina. Fantastic. Okay, right, we will keep going with the... Okay, part B is about the organizations, and again, some of this will be imported. B1, you select the type of organization from the options you get in the drop-down menu, whichever one is appropriate. You then present, under aims and activities, there are two boxes, one where you present a short presentation about your organization, summarizing what it does, obviously stressing the relevance of your organization to what the project is all about. If you're a theatre organisation covering a range of areas and the project is all about puppetry, make sure that your project description here, your presentation, talks about especially all the wonderful activity you've done in the area of puppetry. And then a short 1,000 character about the role of the organisation in the project. So your organisation, what it's going to be doing during the project. Other EU grants in the last 3 years, if you are part of a bigger organisation like a university or a local authority, then you will be applying here as a department or a faculty or whatever, and you're only expected to add in other EU grants that your department or faculty will have had, not all the European grants that your university or local authority might have had. And if you're, where it says other EC applications you're making, our recommendation is that you don't make any, just focus on the application you're putting in to the Creative Europe Culture Programme in this particular example here. Okay. Part C. Okay, so we're now moving away from the applicants and onto the project. So part C is the basic information, calendar, start and end dates, automatically will calculate the duration. Staff numbers, employed will be the staff numbers at the time of the application, and recruited will be as a result of the application. So for example, if you're recruiting a project manager for your application, for your project, that would go in here. You will need this information obviously from your individual partners. Dependencies between partners, this is to make sure that no one is trying to cheat the Commission by submitting an organisation with two partners, one of whom might be a subsidiary or owned by another partner. This is extremely unlikely, so we would imagine that the answer will be there aren't any dependencies, but this is why that question is there, to make sure that the various partners are all completely independent from one another legally. Section 3, relevance to the objectives and priorities. We will go through the objectives and priorities a bit later in terms of question E. If you're selecting more than one of the priorities, then you need to rank those. I mean, this is all quite straightforward. It shouldn't be a problem. Don't select too many priorities. Again, these projects are not being expected to deliver world peace. Select a reasonable 2 or 3 priorities at the most. Again, fields, select whichever fields. They do like projects covering more than one field, so if your project does, then you can select several fields and you can indicate which are the most relevant fields by indicating priorities up to 3. And you then have to add a note, short note, 1,000 characters, explaining the ways the project relates to the fields that you have selected. Participating countries, add as many as relevant. I think this is a slightly interesting question now due to the way in which projects are including the new technologies. It may well be that a key part of your project is making it open for participants from a wide range of countries to participate in some stage of the project. So you may wish to have quite a broad range of participating countries. If you do have a broad range of participating countries way beyond the partner countries, make sure you explain this in your project description as to why you've got 20 participating countries and only 5 partners, and explain that that you are actively seeking participation from these other participating countries in whatever way it is, due to involvement via new technologies in whatever aspects of your project. Section C6 is the summary of the project. This is really, really important. It's important for several reasons. I mean, one reason is this is what the Commission uses in its own marketing and promotion after your project is selected, if it's successful. But it's also important because this is a summary that jury members will instantly look at to begin with. And they will be, they will be highly persuaded by your first paragraph as to whether this project is really interesting and exciting. So your first project must stress how interesting and exciting and wonderful and unique and different this project is and what it is going to do. You don't want to spend the first couple of paragraphs of your project summary giving historical context or stressing how wonderful the partners are. You want to talk about how wonderful the project is and what the project is actually going to do. Section C7 is a summary of the project budget. Obviously, you'll fill that in once you've done the budget. And you have to show how the EU grants are being distributed amongst the partners. C8 is, did you contact the Creative Europe desk? The answer presumably will be yes. You select which areas of support you received and add any comments you may have. Section D is an overview of operational financial capacity. It's actually quite limited in this way. Some of the data will come from the PIC information. You then describe how the international European relevance of the partners is relevant to the implementation of the proposed project. Okay, so the fact that you talk about how your European experience or interests or connection are going to help you make a really positive contribution to this exciting project. Essentially what you're trying to do there. You indicate your self-financing contribution here. So this is section 3 of the income on the budget sheet. This does not include amounts raised from public or private funds. This is essentially amounts you're putting in from your own resources or seconded staff. That is your self-financing contribution. If you're not putting any of your own resources and no seconded staff, this will be 0. Make sure you explain or make a note in your project description that although this might be 0, you are contributing to the raising of the public or private funds, which is section 4 of the income on the budget sheet. At the end of Part D, you can also have a chance to add in any additional partners, such as associate partners, who are going to be working on this project, and you can add a summary of their particular role. Okay, so before looking at Part E, I'm just going to go back once more to check whether there have been any additional questions, and there haven't, so that's fine. I shall now go back to... Okay, so before looking at Part E, remember that there are 4 award criteria, which at the end of the day is the score sheet. The jury score sheet is the same thing as the award criteria. There's 35% for the relevance of the project, 25% for the quality of the content, 20% for communication dissemination, and 20% for the quality of the partnership. And I'll look at those in detail in a moment. But remember that the way in which you address those award criteria, you have 3 opportunities. One is very briefly in your project summary. So in C6, you should be stressing some of the key things about the award criteria. Very briefly, you don't have much space in C6, but there should be some inclusion of key points about how relevant the project is to the overall award criteria. Then in your detailed project description, you should go on at length about making sure that when you describe your project, you are relating at various points to the award criteria. And then finally, section E of the application form asks you specific questions for each of the award criteria. So you have a chance there to demonstrate how your project relates to these criteria. But you also need to select one or more of the priorities, as we said earlier. So let's just sort of take a look at those. These are the 6 priorities. These are the first 3 of them. And you can choose whichever priorities are relevant. And as I said earlier, we don't suggest you choose more than about 2 or 3 of these. The first one is skills, competences, and know-how, internationalization of careers and activities, access to professional opportunities, international cultural activities. Most projects will be selecting that particular priority because most projects will be presenting an exhibition or an exchange or a festival or some performances or whatever it might be. Section 5, priority 5 rather, is relevant to literature-based projects. And priority 6, we would recommend that most projects try and select priority 6 because audience development is clearly such an important aspect of the new criteria. So priority 6 is probably a good priority for projects to be addressing. In terms of the actual criteria, I'm just going to remind you of the criteria here. So the relevance criteria talks about the professionalization and capacity to operate transnationally, circulation of works, mobility of artists, improving access. Relevance is also where you look at how relevant your project is to those particular priorities that we've just looked at. Those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that we've just looked at. And then at the bottom of this slide, you'll see the 2 additional criteria which you need to address here. To what extent is the project aiming at producing results which go beyond the sole interests of the partners and have long-term impacts? In other words, this is what is your project producing as a legacy? What is your project producing that will be left behind that is going to be important and maybe useful for other people working in the cultural sector in Europe? It may be that you produce a guide to doing the sort of project you've just done, and you can have that guide translated into several languages and available to download from your website. That would be a useful legacy. And the final criteria here is how complementary is the project to cultural actions implemented at national, regional or local level. In other words, this is an opportunity for each partner to indicate that the project, while it relates to all these European criteria, the project also relates to the criteria within each member state of the partners. So it may relate to criteria set by the Ministry of Culture in the UK or the partner country, or it may be at a regional or local level. So if the partner is based in Manchester, maybe Manchester City Council has some priorities which this project is also addressing. So it's an opportunity to show that the partner is also relevant to priorities that have been established within the member state level at national, regional or local level. Criteria 2, worth 25%, is quality of the content, an opportunity for you to stress how much quality there is in your project in terms of the quality of the reputation experience of the partners, the creative personnel and practitioners, the deliverables that you're going to be producing as a result of this project, the way in which you're addressing the needs of the target groups, your very imaginative audience development strategy, and so on and so forth. You can read all about those. Third criteria is about communicating and disseminating. There are 2 main things. How are you communicating and disseminating the activities of the project in order to attract participants during the project, or audiences or visitors or whatever? And secondly, how are you going to communicate the results, the legacy of the project? And obviously, as you can see from the 3rd bullet point here, how are you going to make the European Union's support visible during the course of the project? That's really important. Criteria 4, the quality of the partnership. Now this is really about the quality of the management of the partnership. How are you ensuring that you are setting up systems to make sure that all the partners are working in ways where somebody is going to be chasing them to make sure that they deliver the right thing at the right time at the advertised price or whatever, and that everybody is going to be managed to ensure that the project outcomes are delivered at the right time and within the overall budget. Okay, moving on to the detailed description. This is a separate document with a limit of 40,000 characters. There's no prescribed format. The format is entirely up to you. In our view, it should describe in a clear manner the concept and objectives of the project, relevance of the project to the priorities of the culture program, lay out the activities and their objectives, the impact at the European level, role of the partners, and so on. Okay? If the application form doesn't allow enough space in some of the boxes to say everything you need to say, then this is also the place where you can add in a bit more detail. Don't forget that the detailed description will be part of your contract with the European Commission. On the next slide, we give a suggested format. This is only a suggested format. So in our view, you need 3 main sections. The project, where you will address criteria 1 and 2 by providing a summary, information on the background, rationale, outputs, outcomes, impact, and then the detail of the actual activities. Then a section on the partners, which will address criteria 2 and 4, strengths of the partners, role of the partners, and the way the partnership is being managed. And then a section on communication and dissemination. how you're going to promote the activities, how you're promoting the results, and the way you're promoting the European Union and the European Commission and the support that's been offered. Okay, so I'm just going to stop once again to make sure that there are no questions. No, we're doing well, good. Either I've sent you all to sleep or there are genuinely no questions at this particular stage. Right, okay, the award criteria. Each of these 4 sections is linked to specific questions, okay? There are a number of sub-boxes within E1, E2, E3, and E4 where you have up to 1,000 characters to answer the questions. This is just a list of the questions. And this should be fairly straightforward. Relevance of the project to the priorities, results going beyond the partners and having a long-term impact, complementary of the project. So we've talked about these things before. These are the boxes where you fill in your answers to these questions. Are there any other priorities in the project, and how do they relate to the overall objectives of the program? In the area of quality, it asks you to talk about the outputs, the timetable, the allocation of the budget, the assessment of the results, the audience development strategy, and so on and so forth. In E3, how clear and appropriate is the strategy of communication, how is the support made visible, and how are you disseminating information, particularly beyond the duration of the project. E4, the partnership, how is it defined, what's your method of management, will the partnership last beyond the duration of the project, and how does it go beyond the direct geographical neighbours, which relates back to the point we made much earlier. So those are all, each of those bullet points, there is 1,000 characters for you to answer how you address that particular criteria. Section F of the application form is then a work schedule. The start and end dates pop up automatically, and then for each activity, stage or phase, you will then put in a brief description, the start and end dates for that activity, the country and location, and the name of the responsible partner. You don't have to say anything anymore about subcontracting, it's just those 4 points there. So, you know, the stages of your project might be, you know, you might start with a meeting of the partners, and then you might call for a commissioning of artists, and then you might have another meeting of the partners, and then the artists might be going into residencies. There might be another partners meeting, and then there'd be an exhibition of the results of the project, and that exhibition might go, you know, exhibition in venue partner country 1, exhibition in partner country 2, exhibition in partner country 3, and so on. So those would be the sorts of stages of the project. Section G is a whole series of statistics that the Commission needs actually for their own internal statistical purposes. These are not really seen by the jury members, are not used by the jury members in terms of assessing the project. They're simply for statistical purposes, so don't get too hung up about these. You can sort of answer these pretty much by saying whatever you like. Okay, attachments and annexes. Once again, if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to double check that there are no other questions that have come in. No, we're doing well. So that's absolutely fine. Okay. Right. Attachments and annexes. These are submitted as attachments to the e-form and included as annexes on the USB stick or CD-ROM for printed version. The detailed description, which is what we just talked about, the declaration of honour, and then the budget, which we'll look at shortly. Other annexes, now these are the ones that go on the USB stick. The cooperation agreement, which should be a document signed by everybody. Then for each of the lead organisers and co-organisers, you have to have a copy of your statutes, your articles of association, whatever your legal document is. CV of the person responsible for coordination and implementation of the project for each of the partners, and an activity report for the last 2 years, maximum 10 pages, highlighting the sorts of things your organisation has done, and in a sense that will be used to make sure your organisation is credible and viable. For the lead organiser, some of this is not required if the lead organiser is a public body. So if the lead organiser is a university or a local authority, then they will not need some of this information. Otherwise, there's a financial identification form, a financial capacity form, copies of financial statements, and an external audit report if you're applying for more than 750,000 euros. Co-organisers need to sign the mandates, which all have to be brought together in one document. Okay? Budget forms. We're going to look at the budget forms. This is the Excel spreadsheet. There are several tabs you'll see along the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet. Essentially, there is a tab for the overall revenue, the income. There's a tab for the summary of expenditure, and then there's a tab for expenditure for each partner. Partner 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. Okay. Just a few general points about the budget. I'm going to be, obviously, I'm running a little bit behind, so we're going to go beyond, a little beyond 2 o'clock, but I hope that will be acceptable for everybody. Should be finished by about 5 or 10 past 2. VAT can only be included if the organisation can't recover it. So you just want to double check the guidelines again to make sure you completely understand eligible, ineligible, direct, indirect costs and so on. Obviously, estimates must be in euros. The form provides a URL where you can get the relevant exchange rate, although I think that the URL they provide is wrong. If you have any problems with that, send me an email. Rather than start with the official budget form, you may wish to just start with your own single spreadsheet to develop your budget and then transfer this to the form. Sometimes the form can be a bit confusing. If you're worried, I mean, you know, you and your partners, if you're running a theatre project or a visual arts project, you and your partners will know what the costs are going to be. You can work those out without necessarily going to fill it in on the actual budget form to start with. You could fill it out on the just a blank spreadsheet, and then once you've filled it out, you can then annotate your spreadsheet with the codes that the Commission requires, resort your spreadsheet, and then start transferring it to the European Commission form, whatever works for you. The practical thing, there's only one row given for each sort of subsection in the various partner expenditure sheets. If you want more than one row, you have to copy and then paste that in as a new row to make sure that you're copying in the formulae and so on. I think that should be okay. Table 1, consolidated revenue, is a series of headings which I think are all self-explanatory. The first heading is the contribution from the European Commission, split amongst the various partners. The second one is the income generated by the project, ticket sales, fees, publications, merchandise, and so on. The third is the self-financing, the amounts you're putting in from your own bank account or from seconded staff. The fourth is contributions from private sources, so private trusts, foundations, sponsorship, and donations. The next one is public sources, so public bodies such as ministries of culture, arts councils, other agencies which are publicly funded. You have to sign by the legal representative of the lead organiser and stamp it. In the UK, we don't tend to use stamps in the same way as many continental European countries do, so if you don't have a stamp, just go out and get one made up at W.H. Smith and just use it with wild abandon, stamp everything with it. Table 2 is consolidated expenditure. This actually is all created automatically. It adds up all the figures you put into the individual tabs, the individual partners. So all you have to do about that form is get it signed and stamped. Then the tabs for the individual partners, there are various sections, various rows, project costs, communication costs, travel and assistance costs, staff costs, and indirect costs. Okay, so you just fill in those rows as appropriate. I think that's fair. I actually think that is very straightforward. In terms of the columns, you insert the currency and exchange rate at the very top in the top corner, row 7, columns C and D. Then you insert the description in columns B to G, which is actually one column in the way the application form now works. Column H, you put in the reference number that you have created when you set up the work program in section F in the main application form. You then put in the cost as to whether or not it's related to the project leader, a particular partner, or whether it's a joint cost. So if it is, if it is a partner cost to attend a meeting, well, that will be a partner cost. But if it's the production of the project website, that would be a joint cost. So you make that decision. J, K, and L, quantities, duration, and unit cost. Do bear in mind that duration is not used for any of the calculations. So you can sort of put it whatever you like in there. The calculation is based on column J, quantities, and column L, unit cost. So column M is then the amount, which is calculated by column J times column L, and then currency and total, in other words, it's converted into euros automatically based on the currency and exchange rate you put at the top. If it's a third country cost, in other words, related to one of the partners, associate partners in a third country, you say yes and indicate the amount. If it's subcontracting, just say yes or no. and that's signed by the legal representative of the partner. Finally, make sure income equals expenditure, percentages are met, close the budget form. Within the main form, add in the information on the budget figures into the relevant section of the application form. Make sure that you've attached then in the main form the project description, declaration of honour and budget. Press the button at least a day before 11 AM or 12 noon, depending on which part of Europe you're in, on the deadline. You will then receive a submission number. You add that into your application form, and then you print it out, gather all the relevant attachments onto the USB stick, CD-ROM, and then you include the cover letter into an envelope and write the submission number on the envelope and post that off to the agency in Brussels. Not to the Commission, not to the contact points, to the agency in Brussels. Okay, has to be sent by 4 PM Brussels time. Make sure you get it recorded post or send it by courier. Get the fact that you have actually sent it, just in case something goes wrong. And that's it. That is the end. What you will see on the slide there is the services that we offer. Either we do pay for a bit of extra information and advice. If you have simple questions as a result of this, then please don't hesitate to send me an email. If you're a Connexus member, you can download examples of projects, the Am I Ready self-assessment template, and you can get a bit more free advice if you're a Connexus member. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say at this particular point. What I'm going to do now is go back and just see whether there are additional questions that have been added in. That's my email and my information. Thank you very much for participating in this particular webinar. Let's go back and see if there is... right, are there any questions? Hello, what kind of expenses? The question is what kind of expenses, I presume, are allowed to be covered. You can cover any expenses providing they are real expenses and they are related to the needs of the project. So the expense might be paying for the fees for the artists, it might be hiring an artist studio, it may be the travel and accommodation and subsistence cost for the artist, it may be to cover the materials the artists need to undertake their work, it could be for the production of the website, it could be almost anything. I hope that's clear. If I'm sorry, Christina, if I've confused you about what expenses might be, then please don't hesitate to send me an email to ask for clarification about that. That would be absolutely fine. Ooh, somebody's raised their hand. Ooh, that's an interesting one. I'm not quite sure how I get to raised hands. Oh, no, I've just done that. Oh, poll, no. Questions, no. No. Right, okay. Never mind. Right, okay. I'm going to stay on this for a couple more minutes. So if anybody has any other questions they want to send by chat, then I will be here for a few more minutes. And if you have any other questions, then just send me an email and I can answer that. And if anybody wants any additional help with their application, then obviously we do provide a service, but that has to be a paid-for service to help people prepare their applications. So I hope that's been useful. And I thank you very much again. And I'll stay on for a few more minutes and see if anybody has any further questions. Otherwise, I hope to see you at another webinar at some point in the future. Thank you very much for participating, and good luck with any applications that you may be writing. Okay, well, I think that's no more questions, so I'm now going to stop the broadcast, and if anybody has questions, then please send that to me by email. Thanks again, and good afternoon, and we'll hope to see you at another webinar at some point in the future. Bye for now.